here has ever hosted virtual events, but you get twice as many RSVPs. Not everybody can make it, and we want to make sure that those who really wanted to can watch the recording as well, which is why it's going to be also important for people to ask good questions, because the folks that are going to be listening to these recordings after will rely on your awesome questions.
Virtual events, but you get twice as many RSVPs. Not everybody can make it.
All right. Looks like we have the system set up to stream. We'll go back to sharing our screen here, and we are ready to begin the event.
Now all I have to do is find the slides. The perks of working with one monitor sometimes. We got a question here in the chat. If we are twins, Sergey, what do you think?
What do I think? Good guess, Miguel. Yes, we are twins. Vadim always likes to remind people that he had the beard first.
I did.
And I copied him. I'm gonna stop arguing there because it's not worth it. In fact, he did hair first. But yes, we're identical twins actually. And funny enough, we're talking about career paths today. We had very similar career paths. We had the same exact resumes. Graduated college, same major, same school. Same first job actually even, and they just started to divert a little bit after we were kind of in the workforce for about 5 years. Vadim went more the product route actually, so this is a really relevant conversation for him as well. I went more the sales route. There's a bunch of different areas you can go if you want to get into tech. Those are the pathways that we took. But welcome to another School16 event. We host these at least once a month, typically a couple times a month. And our mission here at School16 is to make technology careers more accessible to anyone, regardless of experience, background, education, financial situation, or whatever else it might be. We know that tech careers are accessible. We've had over, I believe this is our 36th event. So we've had more than 36, probably more than 40 speakers over the last several months come to these events. People from all sorts of backgrounds and experiences who have been able to successfully get into tech roles. Our focus here at School16 is the non-technical or less technical roles where you don't have to be a software engineer or a programmer or a computer scientist to break into that career. And there are a lot of jobs like that. And again, because we are all about making tech careers accessible, that's really what we're focusing on here, because there's less barriers to entry typically to those careers. Although product maybe isn't the easiest career to break into. We're going to talk to Sheila about that today. Certainly it's possible, and certainly we want to talk to you about how to do it. But we're excited to invite and hear from Sheila Guastamachio here, Director of Product from PayPal. Also had a tremendous career that we're going to talk through today. And we're really excited to learn from you, Sheila. So thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the event.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And you got my last name right. So you're already off to the races. That's probably the hardest thing you'll do today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I was practicing right before the event a couple of times, and I took a guess, and I guess it was the right one. So I appreciate that.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Awesome. So a quick intro of our agenda, folks, and we will get started in a couple of minutes here. This is the introduction portion, of course. Then we're going to get an introduction from Sheila and hear a little bit about how she developed her career. And then we're going to jump right into the questions that we have prepared for her. And also, of course, we want to hear from you. So after the discussion on the various career paths and skills that you need to be a product manager, we're going to talk about some of the experiences that Sheila had in interviewing for product roles or interviewing other people for product roles to give you guys some additional insight that you typically don't get outside of events like this. We will open up the floor to questions. So if you have a question that comes up even in 5 minutes, go ahead and drop it into the chat. Maybe it'll be relevant earlier on in the conversation, but certainly we're making sure that we're setting aside time towards the end to ask all of the questions that you may have. And we do see the chat. Feel free to, again, introduce yourself and use that throughout the whole session. And once again, this is being recorded. All that we ask at the end is if you fill out a survey, which we'll follow up with you over email. Once you fill out that survey to provide some feedback for us, we will send you the recording of this event so you can reference it later. And last but not least, for those that are interested in learning more directly from experts in the field and getting into tech, if you're looking to advance your career in tech, especially around non-technical roles, we invite you to apply to our 8-week career acceleration program that's starting in June. We'll get to learn about product, operations, marketing, and sales directly from the professionals. To learn more, go ahead and go to the link that was dropped into the chat.
So that deadline is coming out soon because the program is starting June 14th, and we've had 67 people graduate from this program so far. So it is somewhat competitive, but we do have scholarships available for folks that have need-based and also underrepresented in tech. So please do apply today or tomorrow if you want to be considered for that program. All right. So we are going to stop sharing our screen here and spend the rest of the hour learning from Sheila. And folks, again, remember to type your questions in the chat as they come up. And in the end, we'll open it up as well to you so you can ask questions directly, but do type them in the chat and we'll ask them. But just to kick things off, Sheila, I know you have a very interesting experience. There's a lot of different areas that I want to dig into, Vadim and I want to dig into to talk about how you navigated your career and how you ended up breaking into product. But maybe if you can give us like a quick overview of your kind of career to date, how and why you decided to get into tech and how you ended up at PayPal, and then we'll go and dig into some of the details there.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds great. So, so my career really started out more so in the marketing arena, which isn't always traditional for product managers. I think there are many different kind of funnel areas. And aging myself a little bit, back when my career started, there really was not necessarily, it wasn't an entry point to say, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to become a product manager. It was kind of the early days around that aspect. So, I found myself actually at some small tech companies. I was in the Silicon Valley, and so naturally they are everywhere. And now today, that's true for many other parts of the US and of the world. And, part of what I was really exploring, I think, early on in my career is how can I move toward roles where I can maximize my impact, right? Where the kind of the work that I'm doing day in and day out is, directly driving the impact that the company is having, is directly influencing the experiences our customers are having, et cetera. And so I didn't set out with an exact destination of, I know about product management and that's what I'm going to go do. But naturally, in some of those smaller organizations, I really, started to learn more about product management, and very naturally, very quickly, kind of moved in that direction. Part of what really drove me toward that, like I said, was the impact, but also the ability to just build things that didn't exist before that solve real problems. It's just, I don't know what else, at least for me, that's just to this day, one of the most motivating aspects of my work and my career. And so really, I fell in love with product management quite early in my career, and have never looked back kind of in that sense. I think this is definitely the right area for me. In terms of some of the different organizations, as you mentioned, right, some of the small organizations that I worked within were across different industries, all with a tech digital background, from marketplaces, two-sided platforms, some advertising organizations. Most recently worked at Kaiser Permanente, which is one of the largest care providers as well as health insurance providers, and worked in their digital arm. And then about 2 years ago, made the move to PayPal, where I am now. At PayPal, I'm a director of product within their platform product organization, and focused around driving customer engagement, as well as some of the automation products that we are investing in.
Awesome. Great. That was a great little elevator pitch there. I don't know if you practiced it before, but it was very efficient. So then I'm curious, because I know you started off in Silicon Valley in the agency world, serving technology customers, and in a marketing function as well. How did you make that transition from marketing to product, and was it difficult?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think looking back, I don't think that necessarily I got lucky, but I think that there were opportunities provided to me due to being at a smaller, more scrappy organization. And so for me, it actually was not difficult, in the sense that I was working at that time at a small organization, technology platform kind of, company, where I think there were something like 60 people, right? So fairly small, right? And so, marketing was kind of one row next to product management, which was one row next to, to business analytics. and right next to the general manager. And because of that close-knit community, as I was making connections and working with some of the leaders within the organization, when my interest for being able to drive more decision making, being able to make more of an impact for customers became known, and opportunities were created. And so I think that it really enabled me to dabble in product and kind of test it out in a way that was very natural.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize how, especially in smaller organizations, how cross-functional these different teams are and how much they really do work with each other and communicate with each other. But you mentioned when it became known that you had this interest. Do you recall how it became known? Was it something you proactively kind of told people about, started asking about? And in hindsight, if you were going to give a recommendation to somebody who's in a role right now that wants to transition a product, how do they plan for that and effectively influence others to help them make that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say two things. Maybe the first piece I would say is that I do think in some cases it is easier to have some of these opportunities in smaller organizations. So if you're trying to break into kind of a new function, even startup kind of environments, right, where it's scrappy, like if you raise your hand and you say you want to go do something, it can be easier to have those opportunities in those environments. But in terms of some of the, any actions that I took or kind of areas that I communicated, I would really say, and looking back, my motivations were very altruistic. I hadn't defined, okay, I'm going towards product management and here's my, charting my course. I was truly trying to figure out how I could drive more impact for the organization I was working at. And so it wasn't that I was raising, I'd like this specific role, or I'd like this specific opportunity, or, do me a favor in this way. Instead, I was having communications with senior members of the organization, but the communications were around, I see this specific opportunity, or have we explored that, or can we expand this area? And not just raising ideas, but then offering to, almost in retrospect, I was kind of creating stretch opportunities for myself, but that wasn't how I was thinking about it at the time, right? I was kind of seeing opportunities where I thought I could help, and that's really what drove both of the, then I was in stretch roles, and then the formality of moving to the position.
So that's very interesting, Sheila. And I think, oftentimes I tell people that when you're looking for different opportunities, at least for me personally, the customer that the organization is serving was more important above anything else. If I was in a client-facing role, which product, sales, account management, customer success, they all are. And if you like the customer you're serving, you'll be happier in your role. It sounds like you were extra incentivized because you probably were excited about the business model, but also the customers. But I'm curious, once you were in a formal product management role, how did you develop your skills so that you could intelligently make product decisions and do the job? Because there are just, as obviously as there's just so many different skill sets that are required to be successful in that role. I'm sure there were some gaps in your skills and knowledge if you were kind of doing it a little bit more informally in other organizations. How did you develop those skills?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think it's an area where product management, like other functions, is continually evolving. So I view this as something that everyone in this function, right, we are all continually evolving our skills as it changes and adapts. When I look back to early in my career, I think one of the things that I did, so within that initial organization, right, where I made the initial jump, there were other product managers who had been, in this function for more time, obviously, than me. And so I really worked to build not only, classic relationships, but also relationships where I was able to learn from them. So I think that was definitely helpful early on. And as I, if you kind of zoom out, then as I was charting some of my career decisions from that organization, I actually gave preference to some of the larger organizations where there would be not just a handful of product managers, but an entire organization and function of product management for that exact purpose. I had proven to myself and to the organization that I could do this in a very nimble, small, scrappy organization. I wanted to then go to an organization with more formal structure with the function to make sure that I was rounding out any areas that I wanted to expand and strengthen my skills.
Mm-hmm. And so what were some of those areas that once you were in the role for like a year, you realized, okay, I really need to double down and develop those?
I think some of what was also evolving back at this time was really product management being much deeper focused around analytics, right? So there was already kind of a user experience, UX, focus to making sure you have the customer perspective, you have the business and the industry perspective. But analytics back then, it was even called, business intelligence, right? It was early days. And so that was one of the areas that I really attribute some of my early positions to strengthening that skill, and learning more about that area.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And, when you look at right now, when you think about hiring folks, let's say for your team at PayPal or for one of the teams at PayPal, I think a lot of people, they see the value in understanding how to interpret and analyze data, but they might not know what direction to go. Do you become a data analyst? Do you take some certification, or is it enough to just know how to use a couple different tools and demonstrate that?
I think, are you asking for folks who are wanting to work within the product management function, or in terms of the decision between that career path?
The people that already decided they want to work in that function, and if they're trying to get a job at a company, let's say like PayPal.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, data is increasingly important almost no matter your function, right? I mean, I don't actually know the statistic offhand, but right, the amount of data that we're just producing on a second or minute basis. So I think across all functions, having comfort with and ability to understand and leverage data in your decision making, in how you are ultimately, driving at your KPIs, whatever your role is going to increasingly be important. I think whether you need a formal training in data is going to depend on kind of what types of products you may want to, be owning and how you want to specialize. I don't think it's necessarily required.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It definitely does depend on the company. So I want to go back to your kind of trajectory here, and we'll definitely dive in the second half of this conversation more in the details of the role and what's necessary to succeed. But you went from working at a smaller company in a product function to then deciding deliberately that you want to work in a larger organization. Impact was super important for you, and I guess that maybe was the main reason, or one of the main reasons, that drove that decision. Was that a difficult jump to make, and do you recall what that process felt like when you were going through it, when you were going through those interviews, and kind of how you were challenged during that time?
Yeah, it's interesting. So part of the context of that time is this was the financial crisis of, I want to say 2009. I may have my year off a little bit. And so in general, there was just kind of challenges across the board. So it was an area where I was trying to still be intentional with where I was targeting. But I would certainly say it wasn't like I woke up one morning, decided, I'm going to look for a new job. And then, the day after that, I had landed my dream position, right? I think always there's a lot of intentionality. There's a lot of preparation, and there's a lot of, making connections, going and finding the right fit. I know very few cases where it's kind of, I would use the word just easy. And I think that would apply here as well.
So how would you say, because you've been in different industries and have had run product across different types of companies, how did you get most of your opportunities? Was it usually through your network? Was it oftentimes just applying and maybe following through? How was it for you?
It has definitely been a mix for me. And so I think this is also an area where it is evolving over time. So especially if you go back 15 years ago, right, I think the percentages of where your network would come in were just lower, right? LinkedIn was kind of new, right? It wasn't necessarily as evolved in that area. More recently, right, I think the network is more and more important. And I think also as you evolve in your career, your network can be a really key asset. So for me, depending on some of the various positions, it has been a mix of both.
And in the times that you were able to leverage your network, how did you go about activating it? Was there anything that you did to maintain and activate your network over time so that opportunities came your way?
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely am a firm believer in kind of almost the natural or authentic kind of networking, right? So I really, I'm not one of these folks who has like spreadsheets of, people's children's birthdays, and I think you can kind of go too far with it sometimes. And interestingly, some of the connections, right? whether it be through school, through certainly prior folks that you have worked with, right? I think those can be some of the strongest bonds. They do come in, especially when you are kind of, poking your head up and going, what's my next opportunity? What's my next move? But I find it to actually be more valuable to reach out more in the context of truly trying to look to understand what is the culture of that organization, right? I'm intrigued in that organization, but I'd love to learn from you if you've worked there. Other situations where actually some folks through even other networks, right? Someone who I went sailing with many years ago ended up being invaluable to me in learning about the context of one of the organizations that I was interested in. And so I really do believe, looking back, that it's very rarely the kind of like targeted, pinpricked, I have this all precise. And I think where it's more authentic and you're kind of, truly seeking information, that's where there's been more value for me.
Totally agree. I do think people need to be deliberate about expanding their network, but there is, you will get better results if you're taking a more authentic approach to it, less robotic, and people will know, right? It's more about relationships. I'm curious, as you were growing up as a product manager, product people do so many things. You have to be good at analyzing data. You have to be good at working with engineers and designers and executive stakeholders and talking to clients. There's so much you have to be well-versed in. What was particularly challenging for you personally as like one of the skill sets to develop when you were looking to improve as a product manager?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I go back to some of the early days of my career and when I was growing up, I guess, right, in my PM career, to use your terms, I think it would be, like I mentioned earlier, some of the analytics was new and evolving. And so that was an area that I don't know that I would say it was particularly challenging, but I was actively working to hone those skills. And so looking to make connections with that part of the organization, working to try to bring that discipline into some of the product areas, especially where I was working in smaller product functions, where that wasn't necessarily as rigorous. So that was one of the areas that for me, especially in the early days, it was a learning process, looking back.
So important that you mentioned that, looking for people within the organization. Every company has different ways of doing things, but you can't know everything. You certainly can't know, for example, what a particular engineer or an engineering challenge might be unless you talk to those people. And it is about being okay with asking for help, being okay with looking for the people in the organization that can help you skill up. You don't have to do it in a vacuum, and you're certainly not alone. And the people that advance the quickest are the ones that prioritize making those internal connections, especially important in bigger companies, I'm sure.
So now that you have this, obviously you have this context of working in a lot of different organizations, but if you can think back, because I know a lot of people on this call, they might be considering, well, do I go for, and I think there was actually a question earlier on from someone, from Miguel perhaps, do I go for a larger organization earlier in my career and work there because I'll get a certain level of professionalism, or I'll have more impact because of the number of customers they have? Or do I go to a smaller company, right? Because maybe there's more responsibilities and more variety. When you think about that, how would you recommend someone assess that, which one is the right fit for them? Which type of product org is the right fit?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think first I would say, if the intention is kind of, or the context is someone who's looking to break into product management who hasn't necessarily done it before, I think that if you're trying to switch from a different function, pursuing smaller organizations can make that easier. I think, like I mentioned, there's just a scrappiness to smaller organizations where there's just more fluidity in role. And so I think that where you're trying to make a switch, that can actually help you to be able to find some of those opportunities faster. Where you are, maybe coming right out of college, you kind of, know from the beginning you want to pursue product management, and that's, kind of the course that you are charting. I think you can be open to either. Now, there is benefit, right? If you can get a big company, right? One, you're going to be learning the rigor of the practice more quickly and earlier. And two, you're getting the brand of that organization, which will be beneficial to you as you then look for your next career opportunities. But I think I wouldn't discount the personal preference. So everything I just said, right, is based on kind of a vanilla average person who's going to thrive equally well in either of those environments, and none of us are that vanilla average person. So I think there is something to which culture is drawing you more, right? Are you someone who likes structure and wants kind of rigorous, steps forward? Are you someone who thrives on ambiguity and wants to define it from the ground zero? And so, because I think you're going to show up differently based on kind of your appetite for those cultures as well.
100% agree. And for people that are really early in their careers, they might not know what preference they have. I would add one more thing, which is whatever lets you get a foot in the door. If you can get in a big company, great, start there. If you can if it's easier for you to break into a small company based on your network or whatever it might be, you can start there and make a decision later and parlay that to your next role.
One thing I'll add there in terms of getting into a big company, of course, it's going to be much more competitive. But where I've seen people do that successfully, especially earlier on in their career, is if they have something to point to already that shows they at least have some of those skills. For example, we hosted an event with a woman named Prabha who did product marketing at Facebook and afterwards moved into product management. So product marketing was the stepping stone. But before that, she started a nonprofit in college where she had to do a lot, as you can imagine, as part of an executive director for a nonprofit. So that took initiative, that showed that employer that she was able to build something from nothing. Obviously, she did some product marketing for the nonprofit as well and could speak to those direct skills. That's clearly something where she was coming into it, not as a complete novice, but already someone that showed that they can take initiatives. So you can land in a big company early on, but you do have something unique. You do have to have something unique about you. The next question that I have, Sheila, is if you maybe can think back, because I'm sure as a director, maybe you're hiring more senior people now, but if you can think back to last time you were making hiring decisions on individual contributor product managers, can you think back to maybe some examples of people that came from non-traditional backgrounds? So certainly did not have the word PM in their title, but what were maybe some of their experiences? What were their titles, and why did they stand out? And why did you decide to bring them on as a product manager if they were never a product manager before?
Sure. Yeah, I think that there's various examples of this. I mean, two of the titles that stick out most, I think, in terms of folks who have come in through those panels would be program or project manager, right? As well as software engineer, right? So those are two of the kind of adjacent functions that I think naturally lend folks to being interested to pursue product management. And certainly that in each case, you're bringing like a core set of the skills. In each of those cases, I think, as we pursue the interview and ask some of those questions, we're going to be testing for the balanced kind of other side, right, of what it takes to kind of have that whole PM package. So if you're coming in as a software engineer, in my past and in my history, right, there we're really looking to make sure that the individual has some of the communication skills, has some of the influence skills, has some of the collaboration skills, and has the customer focus, right? The ability to really kind of understand from the customer standpoint what would drive value. On the flip side, if it's more of a program or project manager looking to make that switch, some of the communication, driver kind of mentality likely is there. And so there you're going to be testing for technical aptitude. Is this person able to get into a conference room, maybe it's virtual these days, with an architect or a software engineer and whiteboard and evaluate, what solution might make the most sense. So I think it will really pivot based on what skills are obvious that the person will have had in their prior roles and what skills they may be developing. But I think in both cases it is absolutely possible. It is absolutely possible because they're very adjacent functions that really bring a lot of strength as well. And so in each of those cases, I would say for folks who may fit in that bucket, make sure you're also bringing the strength, right? That software engineer has deep technical aptitude, right? And that program manager or project manager has great experience aligning various functions, driving toward a common goal and milestone. So I wouldn't overly focus on the areas that they're going to be testing for. You need to appropriately focus on those, but also don't forget about the strength of what you're bringing in that case.
Yeah, I really like that. Focusing on your strengths and being able to effectively communicate them. And, you know, in the, particularly in the example of being able to show your ability to deeply understand a customer and how you bring value to that customer, do you have any thoughts or examples or advice about how someone might be able to effectively do that? Because I think sometimes people may be good at that, but they kind of sell themselves short because they're not able to communicate that in an interview. Does any kind of example come to mind when you think about someone that's really done it effectively, or just any kind of general advice there?
Yeah, I think especially in that scenario where you're looking to make sure you're going to nail that question, I think there's a wide variety of resources, right? School16 actually probably being one of those resources, but lots of other resources in this area of, you know, honing your product sense or honing your customer focus. And I think they can be extremely valuable because, to your point, even for folks who do this day in and day out, showing up in an interview in that way, where you might have 40 minutes to go through and design the perfect product, you still need to practice it, right? Because you need to be even mindful of, what is my timing, right? How long am I going to focus on segmenting my customers versus how long am I going to, like, how much time will I have left for evaluating different possible solutions? So certainly would encourage folks to look for those resources and take some of that time to practice that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. I have a few more questions here for you, Sheila, but folks, do remember to start typing your questions in the chat. I already see some coming in, but put them in there because I want to make sure, or we both want to make sure we're asking questions that you have that are specific to the problems you're facing, or maybe what you wanted to learn at this event. But I want to talk a little bit about your role at PayPal. And, you know, you mentioned you're on the platform team at PayPal. We had a question in the Q&A come up from Sherry about your day-to-day responsibilities, maybe some of the product initiatives that you're working on. But can you talk a little bit about what your role is like and what it looks like, what you do, and the like? Shed some light on that.
Sure. Yeah, so my role at PayPal is Director of Product Management, focused on kind of customer engagement, customer success. And within that, some of the automation capabilities that we're working to drive. In terms of the day, day in the life, it is always different. I guess that's part of what I love about product management. It's definitely a lot of making sure I am tending to the needs of my team, right? So how am I enabling my team to go do their best work? And often that is clearing up misconceptions, getting alignment with other organizations in order to enable my team to go do that. It's also a matter of, making sure that I am communicating with and aligning with my stakeholders, right? So PayPal is a large organization growing, right? And making sure that we are all in sync when there are different cross-functional areas that really need to come together in order to drive the success of a given initiative or a given product. So that's definitely a focus area. And then, it's also a matter of making sure that I am, keeping up on, the industry trends. This is an area that's evolving very rapidly. And, keeping an eye toward where are some of the areas that my team maybe should explore over time. Where can we test and learn some new capabilities? And so, keeping an eye to that piece as well. In this virtual environment, there's definitely, no shortage of meetings, right? And so that's definitely part of it. But trying to make sure that, we're balancing kind of the large meetings with some of the one-on-one connection points, whether it be with my team or with, key peers and folks who I work with on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for that background. And Alexandra asked, I think, a really interesting question, which is, how do you make decisions as a PM? Are there particular frameworks you rely on? Is a lot of it based on gut feeling? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I think there are several frameworks that you can use, and I think some of them can be more or less valuable depending on the situation. So I won't necessarily name any frameworks here, right? But those can be valuable. I think part of what is really important is to really understand the context of the organization that you are in, the product that you are leading, and what some of your multi-year goals are in that context, because depending on that you may actually make different decisions, right? And so just for one example there, right, if you are managing a legacy product that is bringing in maybe cash flow, it has a stable base of customers, you're going to make different decisions than if you are driving a brand new innovative product that is unproven and doesn't yet have a bunch of customers. So your prioritization framework may be different. Similarly, if you're in an organization where there are resources in order to take some strategic big bets, that is likely going to make sense to do so, because over the multi-year time horizon, you're going to actually drive more impact and more value. If you're in an organization where there is not an ability to do that, given that context, then you need to be really careful, because if you took resources, from kind of a stable product that you needed to care for in order to go after a big bet, that might have actually been the wrong call in that specific context. So I think, several frameworks out there, and I think they all can be very valuable, but making sure you're using the right framework in the context of the organization is, I think, important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you for that. That's great. Great question, Alexandra. Going back a little bit to the day-to-day there, how much of your time is spent, let's say, dealing with or speaking with customers versus managing and working with your internal team or speaking with engineers? And I guess a follow-up to that would be, I'm curious what the different product folks that report to you, how different are their jobs as well from one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think to the first question around spending time with customers, my portfolio actually supports not only end customers, but some of our internal employees as well. So from the platform product perspective, I think of both of those segments as my customers and users. And so there are different ways that we actually can get connection points, observe with their knowledge and approval, observe their behavior to make sure that we're really grounding our initiatives in their actual pain points and their actual goals. Percentage of time is very hard to say, because it often has to do with the life cycle of a given initiative. So when we're in kind of discovery phase or very early on, trying to really ideate what is the right, what are even the right tests to explore right here, then you're going to have a lot more time and a lot more focus with the customers. When you are later on and you're launching, you are still connecting with customers, but you're also, I'd say, relying a little bit more so on your metrics, right? If you're doing an A/B test and such, you're getting different indicators, right? And so the percentage can be different. In terms of how different is the day-to-day of the different product managers on my team, it's I'm smiling because it's so hard to actually know, right? We all kind of have our own day-to-days. So it's not something that I've thought about. I think it really, in many ways, I think it probably is fairly similar, in the sense that they're going to be very focused on working side by side with their engineering leads, architecture, partners as well. They're going to be spending time on their data. They're going to be spending time with customer insight. I think where it may vary a bit will have to do with where their given product or initiative is in that life cycle that I talked about, as well as who their customers are, right? So for folks who are, thinking about kind of the end experiences for PayPal end customers, or for folks who are building platforms and products for some of the internal customers as well.
Yeah, and what you said about your day-to-day really depending on this life cycle of the project, and whether you're doing customer validation, experimentation type of activities, or ideation for actual product decisions that you're going to make. It's exactly the same process, folks, for people that are starting companies and founders. Vadim and I started multiple companies. We've invested in and advised hundreds of founders, and it's the same exact decision and the same exact process, except it's being done by maybe one or two people in a very short, condensed period of time with very little resources and structure. So those product skills can actually be really, really important if you do want to be an entrepreneur or founder yourself. And we have seen people that have been business builders and founders who have then gone the product route for other organizations because they have that context and experience. So that really resonated because it reminded me of a lot of days that we've spent, even though I personally have never been in a formal product function. Vadim has, but not me.
Somewhat formal. They were smaller startups, but they called me product manager. So my next question is, I'm going to reframe a little bit of question that came in anonymously about coming into product management from a completely different field. But let's say I have experience working in the healthcare industry, mostly on the administrative side. I have really good operational experience, but clearly no product experience. I'm pretty tech savvy. I've implemented systems and processes, but again, I've never actually made product decisions to drive features and functionality development. What would you tell that person as a step they can take to get closer to a product management role in tech?
Yeah, so I have gotten good advice, and I don't remember now where exactly it came from, but this concept of kind of, you can be most successful when you're not trying to change two things at the same time. So if you have industry experience in healthcare, for example, and your goal is to move into product management, then you are likely to be most successful to do that, at least initially, staying in the healthcare industry. Because as that hiring manager is reviewing resumes, right, that's a strength, that's value that you're bringing, that you have that industry experience. If you are a product manager looking to get into a different industry, but staying in product, then you're only changing the industry, you're not changing the function at the same time. So I think for that, scenario that you mentioned, I think so long as the person is interested in healthcare organizations, potentially targeting that for their entry point would make sense, and bringing that as a skill on their resume, in the interview, making sure that that context is really known, the value that that aspect would bring. I think also making sure that they're showing some of those key product attributes, right? Especially moving from operations into product. It's going to be really important to show some of the strategic thinking, where there's maybe an example of entrepreneurship, like you mentioned earlier, that could be a way to show that, or where you've maybe done a stretch assignment to show some of those skills. I think that would round out nicely what a hiring manager may be looking for in that context.
Yeah, that's helpful. I really like that advice of focusing on changing one variable versus multiple. I think that's great. I'm curious, are there particular this is a weird question, but are there particular experiences or job titles where you look at them and you're like, that's really not a good fit for product, or I try to avoid those types of experiences?
That is a good question. I think where you are trying to break into product, a couple of things I would say. If you have not had a product role, don't retitle what you were doing as a product manager, because I've seen people do that, and I think it comes back to bite them, because it becomes then obvious if all the bullets, for example, underneath are, actually a different function. So I'd say keep a blend of, be authentic with what you have brought, and then target the right roles, right? So if you're trying to break into product from a given domain or from a given experience set, like I said, look at what will be attributes of value to different organizations and target some of those organizations to begin with. I don't know if there's a particular title that, I don't think there's any title that's just a no-go. I think it's the full package of the individual and what they may bring. But I think the onus is on the candidate to show how they have the aptitude or the experience in some of the key product qualities. So if it's not going to come through the formal title that you've had product manager, even arranging your resume in a way that you are showing, right, strategic experience, and then you're calling out what you've done. Analytics experience, you're calling out what you've done. Technical aptitude, you call out what you've done, to almost help the hiring manager go, oh, I'm checking the boxes. Okay, I want to talk to this person. I think that can help, and in some cases can matter more than job title.
That's great feedback. Definitely make sure you use some of those keywords in at least the description of the roles you've had, or as I like the phrase you use, stretch assignments that maybe are outside of your core responsibilities. Important to mention. Rohit Agarwal asked a really interesting question. How can a generalist PM move towards focused fields such as payments or billing? How would you answer that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I mean, some of the context will depend on what industry and what area you're in as a generalist PM, because I would think generalist PMs can actually move around, I think, quite well, because I think a lot of, especially within technology organizations, I think a lot of the thinking around this is more that PMs are kind of athletes and they can apply their skills to different sports. So I think if you already have a lot of the PM skills and attributes, and you've kind of shown success as a PM in a variety of industries or functions, I wouldn't think there's necessarily something stopping you from going and applying to that industry. I think if you are having trouble, then potentially looking at ways you can show extracurricular interest in that particular industry to round that out and to have things to speak about if and when the question comes up around that specific industry. But this is another area as well where if you're trying to switch to a different industry, try to have that be the only thing that you're switching, right? So if you've been a consumer-focused PM, be looking for roles in that industry that's consumer-focused. If you've been B2B, stay B2B. And then if there's more refinement you want to do from there, do that as a second step.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I really like that advice on focusing on one thing at a time. Super helpful. Another question came in earlier from Aaron Keegan. And I think you mentioned this earlier, how sometimes it's more important to say no. Do you remember maybe the last time where you had to say no to a project or an idea, and maybe what played into that decision? I'm sure it happens every day, actually. So
yeah, I'm increasingly trying to get more and more comfortable saying no, because I do think this is one of the most important skills for a PM. Some of it is not just saying no to products or initiatives or ideas, but also guarding your time. I think that increasingly becomes important as a PM, right? Everybody wants to pitch their idea, and you need to make sure that you're focusing on the most impactful ones. There are definitely a lot of scenarios where you need to say no. I won't go into any specifics, but I think part of what you need to be mindful of is undoubtedly you have limited resources. Even if you are in a situation where you have the ability to hire more engineers, you still are limited by how fast you can hire them. And so there, and if you have a bunch more come in, then you're limited by your focus to give them the right things to work on. So you need to be really mindful of, with limited resources, what are the long-term goals you're trying to drive towards, and what focus areas will drive the impact that you're looking to deliver. And so when an item comes up that maybe is more tactical or maybe is more iterative, and is something, this is the inevitable we should do, right? Worst words for a PM, should do, because there's 2,000 things we should do and should fix and should improve. And we absolutely should, theoretically. But you have to hone it down to what are the 10 things, right? These numbers are random, but what are the smaller set of things that we just must do from the perspective of the impact we're looking to drive, the improvement we're trying to drive in the customer experience, and where you're trying to take the product long term. You have to stay in that driver's seat and make some tough calls.
That does make so much sense. The biggest takeaway for me there is prioritization. I think that's the case for a lot of roles. Certainly if you're in leadership roles or executive roles, you can't do everything. A lot of people get shiny object syndrome when it comes to products and ideas. And oftentimes that's where you can take something that's actually working or on its way to working really well, divert, go in a direction that actually ends up costing you resources, income, and the like, which obviously is a problem as a business. I want to go back to Shivang Dalal's question that came in earlier, and I'm going to actually try to take a stab at this, but if you have any additional thoughts, let me know. They asked, it makes sense that oftentimes it's easier to start at a smaller company if you want to break into product, but A lot of people are coming in that are international students, coming in from other geos that want to land in an American company, for example. And obviously visas and sponsorship issues come up, especially for small businesses. So they feel like they can only pursue larger organizations. My answer to that is, of course, you're at a disadvantage, and that is unfortunate. But the way that I've seen people make up for it is taking on side projects, doing entrepreneurial things. Even if those things don't work and fail, that's still direct experience that you can take on. Sometimes, unfortunately, volunteering and maybe not getting compensated, but you don't have to do that for years. Oftentimes, a project that you take on for a couple months gives you a lot of acceleration in your experience. Anything else you would add to that for people that might feel like, oh, I can only apply to big companies to get this experience?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with everything that you said. The only pieces that I would add is one, I would underscore what you said around entrepreneurial endeavors. Taking something on, even if it fails, is absolutely viewed as a plus. Now, not if you're being kind of silly about it, but if you actually took a stab and you really went to drive something and you have some success metrics and here's where you pivoted, it's going to be a great addition. And so I think that can help you even if you are targeting big companies. The second piece I would say is, depending on, of course, kind of the context of your education and where you are in your career, you can look for some of the associate product manager roles as an entry point to big companies. And so exploring that may have more opportunities around some of the visas and some of those other potential challenges that you might face with a small company.
And I think Jerry has and this is going to be the last question we're able to address here, folks, as we're wrapping up on the hour, so that Sheila can get back to the rest of her day, so she's on the West Coast. But I think part of what you just said answers Chara's question, which is what would you recommend a college student who wants to pursue a career in product get as far as experience or skills to focus on? Because it is hard especially for undergrads. There's not a lot of entry-level product roles out there. A lot of them do require experience, and you're trying to stand out in a really competitive field. Are there any other areas or things that you think someone that's an undergrad or about to graduate, recently graduated, should focus on in terms of skills development that's going to help them stand out?
Yeah, I think we've touched on probably a lot of it. The extracurricular type things really help for product, because it shows also some of the drive and some of the passion. So I always hesitate, because in some cases folks are doing too much of this these days. I mean, it's just, so many different things. So don't overdo it, right? Keep your focus on your goals and where you're driving towards. But if there is some sort of a organization, kind of women in product, or whatever sort of affinity group may actually be interesting to you, that can help. It can help you with networking, it can help you with skills, and it helps to show that interest that you're serious about this function. So that would be one area to consider. And then also, I think if you are, you're in college, you want to do product, pursue internships. I think even if it is unpaid, it's going to be so valuable for you to get that title in any sort of a formal setting. And that can help to open up doors from there.
100% agree. And in fact, there was a college student that I was mentoring a year ago at NYU who told me he really wanted a product job. It was the last few months before graduation. And what he did literally, this was right before the pandemic, but what he did was he went to every single product event that he could find in the city in New York and just started talking to people and meeting people and asking what roles they have available and just being curious about the opportunities. And so that really resonates to me, especially if you're still in school or in college or even in grad school. This is your time to make relationships and network. Might even be more valuable than any specific skill set you could spend time developing, because when you're a college student, that's when people want to help you, right? You're kind of intrinsically in that moment where people want to advise you, help you, mentor you. So spend that time, be deliberate about spending that time, because it can make a difference for you between having an opportunity and not. Sheila Guastamachio, thank you so much for spending the time with us, talking through your career, answering questions honestly and very insightfully. This is one of the best product conversations that we've had here at a School16 event. So thank you so much for everything that you shared today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you both. Very much appreciate it. It's been great. Awesome.
And we're just going to share our screen here for one more second as we wrap up. Somebody asked about a recording. Some folks may have missed the event or the first part of the event. So if we're going to send a survey right after this, but you can go and kind of proactively fill it out if you want. It just takes a minute, because we want to hear how these events are going for you, what we can do to improve. and we read every single response. So school16.co/survey is how you fill that out, and we'll send you a recording of the event.
And Kristen and her team, Kristen Seward, did go ahead and drop these links into the chat. So feel free. There's a lot of people saying thank you. If you scroll up a little higher, you'll see that as well. Once again, if you're interested in learning a little bit more directly and intimately through an 8-week cohort experience, we are recruiting right now for our summer technology career acceleration program. Here's the link, and it's also in the chat as well. And last but not least, if you want to hear more about events like the one you attended today, you're already on our email list, so we will email you. But just in case, you can also follow us on Instagram at School16Co and on LinkedIn. Just type in School16 and we'll pop up there. Again, thank you so much, Sheila. We appreciate the time that you spent with us today. We're looking forward to inviting you back to future events.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your great questions today, and have a good rest of your day. All right. Bye-bye.